Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of Waiting Since 57 podcast. It's a Lions pod. Some of you out there may be used to seeing me talking on the beer side or doing some stuff with my buddy Stu over at Small Town Guys. But it's me, Adam, hosts the show. We've got producer Stu in the background. So if you're we have, there's quite a following around surrounding small time guys, small town, and so it might already be a familiar face for you. He'll be on and off. He's the one pulling the strings, making the magic happen. You know what I mean? Waiting Since 57 is something that we kind of wanted to start doing because I've been doing more streaming, podcasting, and I feel like it's kind of just been helping like my overall streaming game and whatnot. And that's kind of a big part of what I do with the Adam Makes Beer stuff. And so the other thing that's really like my big passion / hobby is Detroit Lions football, NFL football, fantasy football stuff. And so we're gonna roll it with some Lions content. Please make sure to give us a follow over on YouTube and Instagram for Waiting Since 57. The layout of the show for this week, being that it's a bye week show, we're going to kind of do it might feel like a little bit of a flashback now. We'll kind of get into some Bucs Lions quick hitter breakdown from week 7. We'll start dipping into some of the highlights from the bye week. It's always nice to have bye week kind of mid-season. You get a chance to heal some people up, work on some things, get back to the drawing board. So we're going to talk about some things that I think we might see the Lions kind of scheming up in the second half of the season. Some players that we're going to have coming back from injury, which is always a blessing in the NFL. And if you've been following at all this year, whether it be on the fantasy side or just on the fan side, injuries have been unbelievable this year. Do I feel as if it is potentially karma for all of the people who mocked our beloved Lions as they wallowed with the injuries that they had last year? They really didn't wallow until late in the year. Thank you, Washington Commanders. But we'll be dipping into some of that stuff, and a little bit of look ahead. We'll check out some Week 9 action against the Vikings and the hometown boy JJ McCarthy, if that ankle ever is healthy enough. As this podcast is live streamed, make sure to drop questions in the chat. Say hey, tell us where you're from. We will be doing some Q&A at the end of the stream if those questions present themselves. So anyways, let's dig in, and we're going to take a look at that Week 7 game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Baker Mayfield has been on a heater up until last game when they played our Lions. Thoughts on the quarterback position and kind of takes on the quarterback position are one of the things that I find frustrating as a fan. And I try to be a fan that like knows what's going on. I think the fantasy football side of things has helped to drive that. So there's always these quarterbacks that catch these narratives, right? This guy's no good. That guy's no good. This guy's amazing. But I think in general, most quarterbacks are bad when their offensive line is bad. As Lions fans, we've seen that for years. We've had, sometimes bad O-lines and bad quarterbacks in conjunction. But sometimes we can just write off some of these QBs and we don't take into account things like coaching talent, offensive weapons, and offensive scheme. We turned the page on a few quarterbacks and they've been making a comeback. First case in point is obviously Baker Mayfield. The ever decrepit Cleveland Browns turned the page on him and decided to go with your boy Deshaun Watson. It was a mistake. Multiple teams turned the page on him. Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes, Indiana Jones, owner of some of the best nicknames for a quarterback. Three guys that have done their thing after being in bad situations. Against the Lions, Baker did not look good. And it was tied to how often he was under pressure. Baker was a guy that he was early MVP discussion after posting massive numbers through the first several weeks of the season. He had 50 dropbacks against the Lions, sacked 4 times, hit 8 times. And according to Next Gen Stats, the Lions generated 20 quarterback pressures against Mayfield, which is one of the highest marks in the league for week 7. I always love seeing opposing quarterbacks running for their life. And I especially love to see that pressure come from up the middle. A lot of times we're always thinking about these edge defenders that we have creating pressure. A lot of the big, guys that rack up big sack numbers are all playing on the edge. But from a defensive standpoint, when you can generate that pressure up the middle, it creates a different level of trouble for the offensive line and for the quarterback, because it's going to immediately blow up that pocket, and it's going to make it a long day. 2 of the sacks came from the linebacker position for us. We had Campbell and Barnes racking up sacks, and also 2 came from our edge rushers, Al-Quadin Muhammad and Tyrus Wheat. Something that people sleep on when it comes to Baker is the man can scoot. Last year, he had almost 400 yards rushing. All right. He had almost 400 yards rushing, and highest level of his career. And it's a big deal. He was not really seen in the tier as one of those running quarterbacks. You kind of have Lamar, you have Jalen Hurts, you have Jaden Daniels, you have Josh Allen, and he's not on the level of those guys as far as moving out of the pocket like that. But 400 yards on the ground for your quarterback it's a thing. And one of the things that can do is it can help to break down secondaries and put additional pressure on your secondary. And the pressure that we're able to get up front was the real deal. Going into that game, I was talking to my dad. We were texting about the game, and I told him, I thought off the top, I'm like, the entire secondary is injured, literally injured or suspended, Brian Branch. And I thought it was just going to be straight up shootout. We're going to have 2 teams in the mid to high 30s, a ton of points scored, and it was going to be wild. And I thought that the Lions would win, but I thought there was going to be a tremendous amount of points scored. Because Tampa's been doing it all. Baker's been putting up huge numbers. I think he's had at least one game, at least close to 400 yards passing. He's been throwing the ball all over the place. Their wide receivers have really been dynamic, especially Emeka Egbuka. Evans is always strong. Godwin is always strong. Some of those guys are coming back from injuries or getting injuries, and we'll dive into that here in a little bit. But we forget that Baker can run, and so not only the pressure that we put on Baker, but also the containment, also the fact that we are able to keep him from scrambling outside, creating more time for his wide receivers and putting more pressure on our DBs. Those DBs did not need additional pressure. At least I'm assuming. And maybe this is the difference between me and an actual professional athlete. Maybe they don't feel the pressure the way I would. But, we kind of have this practice squad secondary a little bit. And it was no disrespect to those guys. We had Amik Robertson, who typically plays nickel for us he was slid outside. We had Rock Yasin also playing outside. And then we had some guys, and I followed the Lions closely. I don't remember some of these names I didn't know. Arthur Maulet, Nick Whiteside, also at cornerback. Starting safeties were Thomas Harper and Eric Hallett, who played in the place of injured starter Kirby Joseph and the suspended Brian Branch. One of my favorite things about the Brian Branch thing was the number of current and ex-pro players that were thanking him for making a move on Juju. You never want to condone stuff like that or whatever. The kids are watching. It is what it is. But apparently, there's no love lost between Juju and some of the guys that he used to play against and maybe even with. But yeah, so we had that situation with Branch's suspension as well. And it felt like last year all over again. We were so busted up midway, late part through the season into the playoffs. And then we finally just ate it when we played Washington. I feel like everything finally just fell apart from a defensive standpoint, and it could have very easily been a situation where we had something like this popping off last week with the Bucs. So why did this situation work? Why was our defense so good last week? There's some interesting numbers in here. I had already mentioned that Tampa has a really strong wide receiver core. Mike Evans is a future Hall of Famer. I think he's on 10 seasons in a row with 1,000 yards, which might be a record. Maybe that was 12, but it's something crazy. He's in double digits. He's probably going to be a golden jacket guy. Chris Godwin is electric out of the slot if his foot is still attached to his ankle. And it appears as if that is up in the air. They signed him to a fat contract in the offseason, and then he apparently had maybe a second foot and or ankle injury. But he's dynamic out of the slot. Last year, before he got hurt, he was tearing it up. I think it was maybe week 6 when he went down. Week 1 through 6, he was blowing up. So 2 really talented guys there. And then they went out and drafted Igbuka, which I didn't know exactly what to think through the pre-draft research that I had been doing, because I do a lot of that stuff for the stuff that I do in fantasy football, because I'm kind of a loser. A lot of the prospecting stuff that I was reading was saying, Igbuka he's going to translate well to the pro game, primarily out of the slot. Chris Godwin is the slot guy. And so when they drafted Igbuka, I thought to myself, okay, well, maybe Godwin isn't as healthy as they want him to be. But Tampa does some interesting stuff. They play people all over the field. They're one of the few teams in the league. A lot of teams will have guys that play specifically in the slot. And Tampa will play these guys anywhere. And what's been wild to see the first several weeks of the season is they've been using Igbuka out wide in the slot, and he's been crushing. He has been crushing. I wish I had him on more of my fantasy teams. But we have Godwin with the ankle. We have Evans that was coming off of a hamstring injury, and Igbuka was also banged up. So when we're looking at why did this work? Why did this patchwork secondary do its thing? Not taking anything away from the players. We're going to get to them, but that's a factor. They're banged up in the secondary. But still, our guys made plays. One of the things that Baker does really well is he pushes the ball downfield, and he's got that label that you get when you win games. They call you a gunslinger. When you play like that and you don't win games, they call you undisciplined. Don't get me started. That's one of my biggest quarterback pet peeves on how people talk about that position. That drives me nuts. But anyways, Baker apparently, I saw a clip last week I think maybe it was the game before the Lions, before when they played the Lions. And, he's always fiery and doing his thing on the sideline. And, when he was with the Browns and losing, people were saying, well, it was immaturity or bad leadership. But now he's fiery. You know what I mean? People want to follow that guy. That stuff always cracks me up, how those narratives turn over just based on whether or not you're winning. But Baker pushes the ball downfield, and he was 0 for 7 on passes that traveled more than 20 yards in the air. We call those air yards, ladies and gentlemen. It might be a little bit of a fancy football term. But yeah, on passes that traveled more than 20 yards in the air, he was 0 for 7. And then on top of that patchwork defensive backfield had 12 pass breakups. That's a lot, baby. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't even know if I'm going to pronounce this guy's name right. So if I'm saying it wrong, I apologize to you, Arthur. But Arthur Maulet, he had that INT, the one that he stripped away from Cade Otton. I was in the airport coming back from a consult gig in Boston for the beer work that I do. And so I'm watching this game on the screen because it was a late flight out. So I'm just standing outside of an airport bar watching the game. And I saw them reviewing this play. I didn't see the play in real time, but I was watching the replay. And I was saying to myself, there's no way this call is going to break the Lions' way. To me, and I do try to be, I'm going to use the term laundry bro sometimes. And what I mean by laundry bro is somebody that only sees things one way because of the laundry somebody else is wearing. The uniform that their team is wearing makes them believe that everything should only be going their way, right? They just can't be objective about things. I do try to be fairly objective. I am an overly passionate and emotional fan. And my cope as I approach 50, and I try to show my 14-year-old who also loves watching the Lions with me, I try to model a little bit of responsibility. Not that I'm always good at it. But I saw that play go down, and I said to myself, that's not a call the Lions get. It did look like Maulet was able to secure that ball far more than Otton had control of it. And you can see there on the screen that, this is where he has it pulled away. And we finally caught some breaks, man. And I don't want to sound, I don't want to sound too much of a homer. And I think in general, calls are fine enough. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. But it's always hard coming off playing the Chiefs. Let's get real. I just don't like the Chiefs. Some people I love the Chiefs. And I love those people, but I don't love the Chiefs. It was a game I chose not to watch because it was a night game, and I know whether the Lions won or lost, I was going to be too wound up to be able to sleep, so I just made the choice. Hey to everybody in the chat, good to see you in there. Drop questions if you have them. We'll get to them at the end of the pod. So watching some of those ridiculous calls from the Chiefs game, later backed up by the data from UTEP. UTEP did a study that was talking about really 50-50 calls, things that can go either way, pass interference, plays that led to first downs. Kansas City since 2016 has disproportionately benefited from those calls. Don't hate me for saying it, but it's the truth. So after watching some of that stuff that went down in the Lions-Chiefs game, my gut was telling me we're not going to get that INT call, but we did, and I'll take it. Now, the next thing that we have to peel back when we're looking at why Detroit was able to slow down the Bucs, even with this depleted secondary, is my man, Kelvin Shepherd. We need to give the hat tip to Kelvin Shepherd. But I think there's some layers to this. Like there's always nuance when we develop takes on situations, right? First of all, just a couple of stats. Lions played almost 50% man coverage versus the Bucs, up from their season average of about 32%, and that's via Sharp football analysis. If you're an analytics person, check out that content. There's really good stuff in there. They played an elevated level of man, which is atypical, I think. The number is 32%. So that's a jump. And typically the Lions are in the top even quarter of the league as far as how often they play man as opposed to zone. In a situation like that, you're putting pressure on your DBs to be able to stick by their man, potentially not always with help over the top, situations like that. And as we talked about with a matchup like the Bucs, where Baker's going to challenge you, try to throw the ball into tight windows and trust his receivers, he's going to put a lot of pressure on that secondary. And they were 0 for 7 in passes traveling over 20 yards. Okay. So the Lions did that primarily with man and at an advanced rate. The next thing that I think it shows is I think it shows Brad Holmes's ability to bring in guys that fit the scheme. It highlights Shepard's ability to scheme against opposing offenses and his capacity to develop players. I think a lot of times we like to have takes on coaches or players without looking at the bigger picture. And listen, I mean, I was sweating when Aaron Glenn left for the Jets. I was sweating when Ben Johnson took the job at the Bears. And then it turned to hatred because it was the Bears. Why do I have to be the Bears? Go somewhere else. Go to the AFC, like Aaron Glenn, who had enough sense. Because when you go away from us, I could still like you. But I was nervous when Glenn left, right? And keep in mind, I believe they lost 7 coaches total in the offseason. 7 coaches total. And a lot of people are talking about, this brain drain or this leadership loss, this loss of X's and O's, the continuity that you have from season to season of knowing those people, right? The relationships that you form between that. Is there coach to coach? Is there player to coach? So when Shepard came on board, Campbell said he's the guy. And in my mind, Campbell's track record gives him that rope, right? Like it gives him that long leash in my mind. The front office hasn't been flawless. Dan hasn't been flawless, but man, it's night and day to what we used to be. And it's becoming more and more apparent that, people like to talk about Super Bowl windows and everything like that. Going into the season, talking to my son, talking to my dad, talking to my friends, I really feel like we're seeing a situation where the Lions draft well. They're smart with their money by and large. And they develop players well. And I think those are the keys to being a very good team for a very long time. And that's what I think the Lions are going to be. People talk about Super Bowl window. I think that stuff is overblown. And I think that stuff for like the 24-hour news, sports news cycle. People have to have stuff to talk about. But when you look at how the Lions have built this thing, how they don't spend big splash money in free agency in general, not that they won't do it at some point in the future, but the way they're building this thing, the way that Dan Campbell can clearly develop coaches because they're bringing these people up from within. John Morton is a different story. We're not going to jump too much on John Morton today, which that's been solid as well, but I have some takes on that too. But Kelvin Shepard, he had me. I saw that clip of him from Hard Knocks. I almost called it Hot Takes. He had that clip from Hard Knocks where he was talking about Malcolm Rodriguez when old Rodrigo was a rookie. And I believe he was a 6th-round pick. And he was getting on his veterans and saying, you have a 6th-round guy that's beating you out here. Are you going to make me play him? Are you going to make me start him over, give him snaps over you? I loved that snip from Hard Knocks. And, you can see the kind of guys that Dan likes to bring up through that system. And Calvin's one of those dudes, man. Calvin's one of those dudes. He's done some savvy things this year. Me and producer Stu were at the Monday night game when they played the Ravens before we knew that the Ravens were going to kind of be in shambles this season. They were playing the Ravens when they still had Lamar. So if Lamar's on the field, they always have a chance. I know they had a bunch of injuries on defense, but I tell you what, man, they locked him down. They locked Lamar down. And something that Glenn was very, very big on was never running a spy. And Shepard did, and it worked really well in that game. That doesn't mean that they're always going to do that for running quarterbacks, but sometimes you scheme up things for a situation. And so it's some of these things that are building for me, like implementing that spy, seeing the way they made some tweaks to what they're doing with man. Also, they're generating pressure up front, which is also helping that secondary. But you can see how he's working with this group of people and doing some schematic things that I think are exciting long term, right? Like when you project out for the rest of the season. One of the big additions for this game, and speaking of defensive front, was getting Alim McNeill back. Multiple reports list different pressure totals for McNeill. If you ever start diving into the stat side of things, the analytics side of things, you're always going to see some differences from site to site. And so I kind of just pick some, and then sometimes I'll average those numbers out a little bit. But the Lions official website indicates he finished with 5 pressures, while other sources list the total as 3. Regardless, his return provided significant interior pass rush for the Detroit defense. Again, this pressure is coming from the inside of the line, which is particularly disruptive for quarterbacks, and it really helps to break down the pocket. He also had 1 pass deflection, and one of the things that I love when I see our defensive players lining up, if they are not getting to the quarterback, getting those big hands up and tipping those passes. So many interceptions are generated at the line of scrimmage by defensive linemen, people rushing the quarterback, getting their hands up on that pass. It's a really, really big deal. And so sometimes you just think, oh, tackles for loss, sacks, pressures, hits, all those stats are great, but you have to have right in there too, tip passes, deflected passes. It's really a big deal when we're talking about creating that pressure up front. And so, looking at that game, my hope was, because that secondary was so beaten up, we get a lean back, maybe we're a little healthy up front, maybe we can get some pressure. That was how I thought we were going to get our win on this. And it just ended up being that we got both. All right. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. That's going to be a wrap on the Lions Bucs game. Again, it was a week and a half ago at this point. The pods are going to be usually the day after the Lions play, as long as I don't have a conflict with my schedule, but it'd be as close as possible to the day after they play. So usually we'll be diving in on that. This time, this segment, it's a little bit of throwback material, but it is what it is. So let's dip into some of the bye week outlook. The first thing I think about when we start getting into bye is I'm always thinking about, can we get players healthy, right? So if you're not staying up with Pride of Detroit online, you should be. So players nearing return from injury, and this is per Pride of Detroit. The first person that we're going to talk about getting back is linebacker Malcolm Rodriguez, or Rodrigo, as Dan Campbell likes to call him. He is expected to be taking part in Tuesday's padded practice. It's going to be his first since tearing his ACL on Thanksgiving last year. The team is targeting potentially a Week 11 return for him, and that would be against the Eagles. I do think one of the things that's nice, if we can be staying healthy over the next few weeks, You don't want to be rushing these guys back. So they have this practice window, this 3-week window, where they can determine their status going forward, be able to ease them in, being able to ease them in once they are seeing game action, to not having to take a full load of snaps, things like that. That stuff matters. Coming back from injury too soon matters. You can ask Evans. What was the first name? Mike Evans. I'm not saying that his collarbone thing, whatever, but people retweak hamstrings, people re-injure things all the time. Next, also per Pride of Detroit, Campbell also revealed that the team started the evaluation clock for safety Daniel Thomas. Thomas suffered a broken forearm during the Week 3 game against the Ravens. It did require surgery. Things are crazy, man. People are crazy. It did require surgery, but it appears he's going to be ready to be back on the field. Which, good for you, man. You're a tougher man than I am. What's going to be good about that is, Thomas was a significant contributor on special teams, playing gunner on punt coverage and everything like that. So it'll be good to get some of these guys back. Sometimes I think that when they're not like the premier names, you really need your nuts and bolts guys. You know what I mean? Your dirty work guys, your special teams guys, all that stuff matters, right? You need to be able to spread those. You need to be able to spread those snaps around. You know what I mean? Somebody else has to make up for those snaps. All right. Terry Arnold. I'm kind of up and down on Arnold this year. My hunch is that he's been injured since the beginning of the year and he's not fully healthy. That's my hope, because I don't think he looks good. I don't really think he's looked very good all year. I was looking at some stats. I didn't dig up anything specifically for this, but he's been giving up pretty high completion percentages, some pretty fat yards. And my hunch is he probably came in injured and has been playing through things. He is going to be back in limited practice this week. We'll see how they ramp him up for this game. It's going to be interesting to see if they feel as if they have to rush people back with how well things went last week or against the Bucs, especially coming up against the Vikings and our boy JJ McCarthy. But we'll dip in on that a little bit later. Remember our big free agents, our big free agency signing, DJ Reed. He's going to be eligible for return Week 10. Whether or not he's back at that point remains to be seen. That Week 10 game is against the cursed Washington Commanders. They're only the cursed because you knocked us out of the playoffs last year. You're expecting me to not have feelings about that? Come on. So secondary getting healthier. Some players that should be getting back, but waiting to hear more on. Kirby Joseph, Taylor Decker, Vaki, Davenport, Pascal, Levante Maddox, Miles Frazier. These are guys that are, as of this time, not out for the season. Decker's been playing on and off. It would be nice to get him healthy. He has missed some time. But then again, this is what these buys are for. On the offensive front, this is where some of the fantasy stuff that I follow from an analytics standpoint starts kind of merging with real life football, with actual football. I'm always interested in tracking backfield usage shares. And, the Lions have had a really interesting situation the last few seasons with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. A lot of times you'll see timeshares, back when Barry was in the league, he was a 3-down back. He never came off the field. Maybe he got spelled or something after a long run, but, we had like the bell cow back then, Emmitt Smith, Thurman Thomas, all these guys, they did it all. They caught passes, they ran up the middle, they did the goal line work. Now the league has shifted so much. It's almost like baseball a little bit, where we have these specialists. In baseball, you have guys that start the game, but they're like starting relievers and they pitch 1 or 2 innings or 3 innings. Obviously closers, but setup men, sixth inning men, 7th inning men. Increasingly, you see stuff like this happening with the running back position. And you see guys that are goal line guys, passing down guys, whether it be blocking or receiving. Guys that are used between the 20s. You know what I mean? Your hurry up offense guys. And so a lot of times you'll see, these 3-headed backfields for people. And from a usage standpoint, when you're trying to play fantasy, the more people you have getting touches out of a backfield, it's less value for that backfield because you can predict it less, right? The value is spread out over those things. So looking at what the Lions do is really interesting because they have 2. Jahmyr Gibbs is a top 3 to 4 running back in the league, hands down. You could say higher. I don't have a problem with that. Montgomery is not in the same tier, but Montgomery is, both of them are guys that are 3-down backs. They can both receive, they can do goal line work, they can block, and they can catch. Gibbs is potentially the most electric runner out of the backfield, or at least he's in that conversation. In this game, when he hit that 78-yard touchdown, I think Next Gen Stats said he hit 22 miles an hour or higher. It was the highest time, or one of the top 2 times that are, and they're both owned by him. But looking at this usage split between Gibbs and Montgomery, really last year, I think it shaded a little bit more toward Montgomery. The usage did, probably as far as snaps go, it was maybe 55-60% Montgomery, and then 40 to 45% going to Gibbs, or whatever the math is. And what you saw was you kind of saw a drive to drive thing going on. And it's really interesting to me to see how they have been utilizing Gibbs more this season. And I get it, because they'll always talk about explosives. You know what I mean? You need that big playability to put additional pressure on the defense. But Gibbs that's really flip-flopped. This year, Gibbs is playing 62% of the snaps. I have Montgomery down here for 39%. These numbers are per Sports Illustrated. I'm not the best at math, but that seems like 101%. But we're doing the best we can here. Thanks a lot, Sports Illustrated. But as far as touches, Gibbs has had 130 touches, Montgomery 90. And yards per carry, which is not the best stat to track running back success with, because if you're getting multiple touches inside the 5-yard line, it's going to push your yards per carry down. So it's not the best metric for seeing how well a back has been playing. But Gibbs is at 5.1 per carry. Montgomery is at 4.6. And personally, I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do with this running back share, not just because Campbell said last week that they want to even that out a little bit. I think the beauty of having 2 guys that could be full-on workhorse backs is you can use them in a way that they are constantly fresh. Gibbs can kill you with his electric agility, speed, the game-breaking type speed. And then Montgomery can break you. I think it was Seattle last year where he caught that pass in the flat, leveled the cornerback Witherspoon, I believe, and then broke it back across field. Hey, and hats off to Witherspoon, because he came back. He was the guy that actually made the tackle on the other side of the field. So it's not that Gibbs, it's not that Montgomery doesn't have something in his bag too, but they're 2 different players. I think the beauty of having both of them is to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the defense in different ways with a back that is consistently fresh, because they can rotate them. It's going to be interesting to see how they come out of the bye looking to potentially get more back to that, right? So that's one thing that I'm going to keep an eye on as we come out of the bye. I think we're going to, there were some people that were mad. One of my dear friends, I'm in a fantasy league with him, and JMO gave him 0 points last week, and he rage dropped him. I don't blame him. Okay. I think some fans out there may be wishing they can rage drop JMO. Let's look at some of the numbers though with him, and I think this might help explain what's going on with some of his usage. This is again per Warren Sharp on YouTube. Jameson Williams 2025 target share is projected is right now at 15%, 15.3%. And what a target share is in any given game. So say we're just going to make it really easy. Goff throws the ball 10 times in a game, and he throws it to Jameson Williams once. That's a 10% target share. Okay, so 15% of Goff's targets are going to Jameson Williams in 2025. That's a decrease from his almost 19% target share in 2024. So he is seeing less targets this year. But per ESPN, this is another one of my favorite wide receiver stats. We're going to talk about ADOT, or average depth of target. Jameson Williams' 2025 average depth of target is around 17 yards. That's a lot. Okay. So that means usually when he is targeted by Goff, that ball is traveling 17 yards or more. Okay. So he's clearly being used as a deep threat. So how does this affect JMO's productivity? When you are getting a lower percentage of you're going to get a lower percentage of completions on deep routes. It just is what it is. There's a reason why you see Rashee Rice grabbing 9 out of 9 receptions off 9 targets last night with the Chiefs. It's because every one of his targets, he has like a 2-yard ADOT. Okay. When he catches the ball, it's like 2 yards from the line of scrimmage. It is so much easier to complete those passes than it is the 117 yards downfield. Especially with the fact that NFL defenses have been changing in recent years and been sliding 2 safeties back. We see less and less safeties in the box because they want to take away that deep threat, right? Functionally, what JMO is running a lot this season, he's running a lot of clear out routes. He's stretching the top end of that defense and extending them, right? Putting a lot of pressure on the defense vertically, which creates space underneath, and it creates holes underneath. And you know who is eating up those targets like a madman is our man Amon-Ra St. Brown. The Goff-Brown connection is crazy. I don't know. It's probably you can probably name a few people. So like JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba this year, and Sammy Darnold. They've been tearing it up, man. Their connection's very strong. You have Rashee Rice in Kansas City. Apparently you have Joe Flacco with with Cincinnati just feeding Jamar Chase. And then one of my favorite lines that I heard this year was when before Puka Nacua got hurt, Stafford and Nacua, their connection is wild. You know, Stafford was having those back issues, and at one point he had an epidural. And I heard a commentator say that he got the epidural because he was having a baby, and that baby was Nacua. And he has just been feeding him nonstop. It's taking something that is beautiful and making it sound gross. But Goff and St. Brown have that same kind of connection. You know what I mean? I really do think it's one of those kind of top 5 wide receiver quarterback connections in the league. And when you watch some of those routes, when you watch how wide open Brown gets, it's crazy. Part of the reason that's happening is because Jameson is stretching the defense. He's taking the top off the defense. All right. All of that said, they dropped roughly, it's plus or minus. The contract numbers are always a little wonky, but they dropped roughly $83 million on this guy in an extension. And I can understand why some fans may want to see something else happening with him. I don't blame you. I do know the team loves this guy, though. I mean, even when he's getting popped for everything, whether it be like, gambling on college games, in facility. What else did he get popped for? Did he get popped for a gun, or was that Gibbs? It was something else. He had a few other bonehead things. And what was it, a performance enhancing stuff as well? I don't remember off the top, but he's had his issues staying on the field. But they love him, man. They love him. I think one of the reasons is his talent is electric. Okay. His talent is electric. But also, he's a dirty dog out there, man. If you watch this guy blocking, one of the things I love about the Lions wideouts, and one of the reasons why their run game works so well, is they have dogs at the wideout position that will absolutely block the living tar out of DBs and linebackers, man. It's awesome. It's awesome. And J-Mo's one of those guys. He gets in there. He loves playing football. And he seems to be able to maintain the right attitude through these zero target games or these zero catch games, because I think he had 2 targets against the Bucs. That said, I think they're going to need to scheme some stuff up. I mean, you want to. He's dynamic. There's a lot of mouths to feed on the Lions. St. Brown is going to be commanding probably at least 25% of the targets from Goff. You have targets going to running backs, Laporta, some scraps that get thrown at Khalif Raymond, maybe even a little Tesla thrown in there. There's a lot of people that they can be throwing the ball to, moving the ball to through the air. So I'm not saying the rest of the year we're going to see massive target share for Jameson, but I do think they need to figure out some ways to get that ball in his hands in different ways. They need to be creative with that. They're paying him a lot of money, and he's explosive. Trade deadline stuff. I forget what exactly the trade deadline date is. Stu, can you pop that into the private chat for me, please, or comments or whatever? I'm not remembering what trade deadline is. Tuesday, we think, for trade line. Thanks a lot, brother. Trade deadline stuff coming up. If Brad Holmes is going to disappoint you as a Lions fan, he's going to disappoint you when it comes to trades and free agency. Everybody wanted us to trade for all these big name players in the offseason, especially edge help. But listen, Brad Holmes is going to do Brad Holmes things. All right. Brad Holmes things means that you're going to be aggressive in the draft, moving up to get the players that you think are your guys. I will tell you what, they have drafted as well as you can in Brad Holmes' tenure here with the Lions. They're going to have their misses, their second round guys, the injury guys that never got healthy. There's always that stuff, but they have had very, very big hits. And the foundation of this, what appears to be perpetually winning team, is built through their draft. Ironically, look at draft grades. Everybody hates their drafts, but they know their dudes. They know who they can develop, and they do their thing. So Brad's going to do Brad things. He hasn't traded for big name edge help. I mean, if you remember people beating the drum for Max Crosby, for Myles Garrett. From a competition standpoint, I can sympathize with Myles Garrett, but we're talking real life in this situation. And to watch Myles, smashing his helmet around, at least he's not hitting another human being with it this time. But he took the bag to stay in Cleveland. They gave him a lot of money. I don't remember what that money was for Garrett, but he took a fat stack, and he should just deal with it. Yeah, I mean, maybe Stu is saying, maybe Dallas makes a move. It would be crazy to see them go ahead and move. They moved their linebacker to Green Bay, Parsons, and then to have them go ahead and make a move for Garrett. That would be hilarious. But I mean, listen, those guys are big time game changers. Myles Garrett he's one of those generational edge guys, right? I wouldn't be mad if they did that, but those aren't the moves they make historically. Maybe they feel like they're on the edge of something. No pun intended. Yeah, he did have 5 sacks in that loss. You are correct, Stu. It was wild, man. But I don't think they're going to do anything big. That's just going off history. I could be wrong, and maybe they're ready to try to take it to the next level, whatever. I think they're going to be trying to save their money to re-sign their own guys, because historically that's what they've done. If they do make moves, I've heard some different things. I mean, pretty obviously, I think you can talk secondary and edge. Al-Qadim Muhammad has done a good job on the outside, but I believe he's 30 off the top of my head, maybe 29 or 30, the most productive year he's ever had. And maybe they tapped into something special with him, yeah, but I can see them maybe wanting some depth there. Also, for that secondary, which year after year ends up being depleted, can't blame him for that. So trade deadline stuff, we'll see. If you're hoping for the big fireworks from our man Brad, it doesn't seem to be his style. Okay. Next up, a look ahead. Brutal schedule. I told one of my boys, I said, listen, this is a brutal schedule, man. This is especially looking at the beginning of the year. And they poo-pooed me. But parity in the league, like it's been wild, the number of really good teams that stacked up a couple of losses within the first 4 to 6 weeks. But, I think the Lions, very easily could still be winning a lot of games this year. I know that there are the people out there, the haters, le haters in French. But people want to say they've lost too many coaches. Sometimes people will say that Dan's just he's a crying cheerleader and everybody else was the brains of the operation. I always love it when people think that Campbell isn't smart. He was the one that has changed the way the league calls things from an analytical standpoint on 4th down. Don't hate, baby. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's treating 4th down the way Dan Campbell treats 4th down. But he's just a meathead, right? He's just a big dummy. He's a CEO. I heard Coward say this week, which is a terrible take. Coward said that he is Ted Lasso with muscles. Dumb take. Okay. You've seen this offense carry over. Okay. One of the bad moves that Campbell made, and that's slipping my mind right now, Stu, if you can remember or check it out, his original offensive coordinator hire. It's on the tip of my tongue, but he ended up dumping him within the first 6-7 games of the season, and took over play calling, and he was calling plays. He had the sheet, he was McVaying, covering up his mouth, calling plays, and the offense got better with scrubs, with bad people on offense. Okay. It was not like they had the talent that they have right now. So I think Dan has a lot more to do with the offense than what people give him credit for, but I'm going far afield here, but you never know how this schedule is going to shake out. And at the beginning of the year, the Lions were seen as having one of the more difficult schedules in the league. Looking how it's shaping up here, we have Vikings next week, Commanders. Those 2 games should have been very, very tough at the beginning of the season. I'm not saying they're going to win, lose, or otherwise, but they seem less scary now than they did at the beginning of the season. I think we expected the Giants to not be good, and they've been a little bit better than we thought. Jackson Dart. He can't shave, but he's got 90 diamonds around his neck while he's on the football field. That doesn't bother me at all. Cowboys, Rams, Steelers, Vikings again, and Chicago. One of the things I like to see on that schedule, if I'm doing my math right, I'm seeing 6 of 8 of those games being played inside. I love that. This team does perform better. Yes, you can tell me, yeah, they went to Lambeau and put up points. I know, but statistically, that they perform better inside. They perform better inside. So that's a plus. Vikings do not appear to be as strong. Washington does not appear to be as strong. The Eagles seem to have some of the shine lost from last year. I think the Eagles are missing. Who's the guy that went to New Orleans? Their offensive coordinator. He came from Dallas before that. I think Philly is really missing last year's OC. They're doing some things differently than they did last year, but we're not talking Eagles right now. Green Bay is going to be tough. Dallas can always be tough. I always feel like Dallas is another team that you're gonna miss some. You're gonna get some bad calls against. LA is always tough, man. Stafford's a dog. He's 97 years old. He's got 1.5 vertebrae left. But maybe he just wants to keep playing for love of the game. Either that or to get a little elbow room from his podcasting wife, Kelly. The Steelers, Vikings against Chicago. I feel as if I think the floor for it, and maybe this is just me, being reckless. I think the floor is 12 wins. Go ahead, Stu.
I wanted to come in on this one.
Go ahead.
I'm excited for the Steelers.
Tell me about it.
Because if Rodgers, I don't know where Aaron Rodgers is with his DMT trip stuff at the moment. But if Brian Branch is out there, Kirby Joseph's out there, we got all of these guys out there, he's going to be seeing ghosts.
Yeah.
Bro,
he looked like a ghost. The saddest thing, I saw a clip, and when I was watching it live, dude, listen, and I'm older than him, and I look older than him, all that stuff, but he needs some of the beard back or whatever, because he looked aged in that helmet. The
helmet looked so big, and the yellow uniform. It looked. I don't even know what was going on. It looked like a street sign in a country I've never been to before. Like I didn't know what was going on.
Yes,
but there are guys that, they're just enemies. Pat Mahomes' enemy. Aaron Rodgers,
enemy of the pod.
Aaron Rodgers is always there.
Oh,
I might personally like him. But no, when it comes to football, we just have to eat his lunch.
Enemy of the pod.
Yeah, that's all.
Enemy of the pod.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's the one I'm pumped for.
I love it, dude. I love it. So and honestly, I feel like you could get 14 wins out of that. I mean, really, you really could if they stay healthy, if they get some players coming back, and there's always variance. One of the things I always talk to my son about is it really is, I thought this team was bad. How come they beat this team that I thought was good? Because it can happen. I do think, like, when people talk about the magic around a team or the intangibles, I think the Lions are going to be a team that have some of those intangibles working in their favor, because I think they have high quality leadership that connect well with their players. They have smart coaches, and they play really, really hard. And that's not across the board. I think that gives you a leg up, but we'll see. That could just be me on the blue Kool-Aid. But let's dip into this Vikings matchup next week. Lions are home against the Vikings, 1:00 start, making the East Coast dads happy. All right. I don't want another Monday night game. I don't want a Sunday night game. Give me a 1:00 game where I can try to cope through the game, manage my stress, and still try to be a father to my family. Okay. I'm past the point to where I can allow that game to destroy me, and then I make everybody else in my house miserable. I can't do that anymore. Have I done it in the past? Maybe. But the goal is no more. Lions are favored by 8.5, 9.5 points, depending on what site you're working with. Game total is around 48. And so that's just the projected combined total points scored in that game between the two teams. So that means Vegas is predicting a final score of roughly Lions 28, Vikings 20. I feel pretty good about that. There's major questions surrounding JJ McCarthy. This guy gets the dreaded high ankle sprain, I believe, after week 2. A lot of people are calling out soft benching because they got that Carson Wentz playing several weeks after that. 2 games is not enough time to evaluate a quarterback. McCarthy has great tools. The kid's super fast. His combine numbers were great. He's an athlete. Okay. You can say he never threw the ball in college. Fine, whatever. There's a lot of guys that don't have a rifle for an arm. He's supposed to be cerebral, all those things. That he's a winner. We'll see. We'll see. It hasn't been a good start. And people have been debating whether or not he's been healthy enough to play. But they've just ran through this kind of soft benching thing by playing Wentz. And then they played Wentz until they basically beat him to death. Okay. I think they had this brother out there. Like, I think the labrum was gone. It was dislocated. It was rearranged. It was sprained. It was tweaked. But look at him. The man's in pain. And still they had JJ on the sideline with his broccoli hair that the young Bucs like to rock. Few things make me feel as old as young people's haircuts. But McCarthy has those tools, whether it's going to work out. And listen, everybody was saying that Kevin O'Connell was one of these quarterback whisperers. He's an offensive mastermind. They've been efficient on offense for years with stars like Josh Dobbs. That's astronaut Josh Dobbs to you. Nick Mullins. Sammy D, baby. Sam Darnold brought his career back with the Vikings. Now, those guys all put up numbers. And I'm not saying there were interceptions in there too. But these dudes are throwing for 300 yards, multiple touchdowns, maybe some picks thrown in there too. But that's because some of them are kind of whack. But they've always gotten production out of those quarterbacks. Now they have weapons. It goes back to the conversation we were having before. Justin Jefferson, arguably the best wide receiver in the game, easily top 3. Addison, your tight end, what's his name? Hawkinson. Aaron Jones can still catch passes out of the backfield. But quick update. Yeah, that original OC hire was Anthony Lynn. Thank you, Stu. And Kellen Moore. So, but yeah, I mean, and they've also had good offensive line play, but they've been banged up on the offensive line. And as a result, quarterback position has been suffering. They have been bad offensively. If you invested heavily in Vikings, if you're a fantasy player, you haven't enjoyed it. So here's my not a prediction. My prediction for the game is Lions 33, Vikings 23. I'm not going to tell you to take the over, even though that's what I'm predicting, because I'm not one of those guys. You don't come here for this. Okay? You come here for this. Me, you, producer Stu. Okay? That's why you're here. Not a prediction. Lions 33, Vikings 23. What else, man? Yeah, I think that's going to be it. We appreciate you all tuning in. Make sure to check out the Waiting Since 57 YouTube. Give us a subscribe there. Over on Instagram, give us a follow over there. Next week, I think we might be going Tuesday. I need to talk to Stu. I already have a pod scheduled on Monday. But I love it. I'd love to hear feedback on this stuff, you guys, what you would like to hear us talking about and how we're kind of building this podcast out. So definitely get in those comments. Share it with your other Lions loving people. And yeah, we appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.